I was recently asked a question: how do I get less defensive when somebody pushes my buttons? Well, what is a button? Let's start with that. Anything that you have experienced and perceived in your past that you associated more pleasure than pain or more pain than pleasure, and the more extreme those polarities are, the more you will have a button. The amygdala, which is a subcortical area of the brain, stores, well, first of all, it assigns valency, positive or negative charge, to perceived events. Those perceived events are then stored in the hippocampus, which is a subcortical area of the brain nearby the amygdala. And that is stored in an episodic memory, and it gives rise to intrusive thoughts, and it occupies space and time in the mind because an episodic memory is spaceful and timeful. It gives you a location and a time. And so we have that stored in there, and any polarized perception that hasn't been neutralized will stay there and be a button and be, in a sense, an engram or emotion, and we'll have a trigger available. And we're designed to have, when people push our buttons, to bring up to our awareness that incomplete awareness. Anytime we're conscious of the positives and unconscious of the negatives, or conscious of the negatives and unconscious of the positives, it's going to be stored there. When we see both sides, positive and negative, neutralize the valency, we don't have a button in the first place. So we're designed to react when somebody says something that's charged. So if we're really super infatuated with a Trump, or really resentful to a Trump, Mr. Trump, President Trump, we're going to react with a pleasure or pain response. And we're going to defend our perspective if we have not neutralized it in our past. So when somebody pushes your buttons, it's wise to go back and look at where you have an imbalanced ratio of perceptions in the first place, which is what gave rise to the button, and go back and take the time to reflect and ask, when they push your button, if you're infatuated with something, what are the downsides? If you're resentful to something, what are the upsides? And neutralize it until you see both sides simultaneously. Then you don't react. You're poised, you're present, you're purposeful, you're prioritized, you're patient, you're productive. But in that moment when you react, instead of sitting there having a kind of a delusion that you're not going to react, because anything that's valent is going to cause a reaction, you can stop. And obviously, you have an incomplete awareness. You're seeing one side, not seeing both sides of the event. The only way out of that response is to see both sides simultaneously, where there's no reaction. You're resilient and adaptable when you have a neutral perspective. So the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions you ask. When you find you have a button on something and you react, you can stop and ask, if they're saying something you think is negative and it's bringing out a reaction of avoidance, what are the benefits to what they're saying and to what they're referring to, and neutralize it. Or if it's something positive and you react, because you can get hooked by positives as just as many as negatives and have an impulse towards as much as an instinct away, what are the downsides? If you ask questions that equilibrate the mind and neutralize the perception, you take information out of the hippocampus and the amygdala's response up into the executive center in the forebrain, where you're poised and present and you're now rational and reasonable and you don't react. So just to answer that question, you're going to react as long as it's polarized. It's your button. That's what a button's for, to teach you what you haven't loved and haven't balanced in your perception, to give you an opportunity to balance it now. Now the question is to ask the question to equilibrate it to see both sides simultaneously.